Hi, I'm Ernie Conover. A table saw is one of the most useful tools you can have in a woodworking shop. They come in a wide variety of sizes, from industrial sliding table models, of which this Felder 500 is a small example, to small tabletop saws, often called a contractor saw, that'll fit in the trunk of most cars. Unfortunately, the table saw is also a somewhat dangerous tool. There is a saw on the market made by a company called SawStop, and that has technology that if you as much as touch the blade, it will instantly stop the blade and draw it underneath the table. If you're considering a new saw, this is certainly a saw to give consideration to. However, there are some very simple, safe practices that you can employ in using any saw. Even a SawStop will be safer by observing these simple guidelines. I'd like to share them with you now. I've walked into countless woodworking shops over the years in which there was just a table saw with a bare blade, a naked blade, sticking out of the table. If that's your choice, at least adjust the blade height so that it is just barely higher than the material. The length of the carbide is a good example. I consider it foolhardy to not also employ what is called a splitter. They come with your saw and they ride just behind the blade, and they're a little bit thicker than the blade. When you rip a piece of wood, it can do three different things. It can spread apart like a banana, it can stay the same, or it can pinch, leaving you cutting here and it pinching back here, which throws it up. It rides across the top of the blade, and a kickback, which can do serious injury, is the result. It can also drag your hand in odd directions. So the addition of a splitter is really, really important. So that's number two. Number three is what I call a box guard. In many inexpensive saws, they're incorporated into the splitter, and it can be quite a hassle to take them on and off. In better saws, it's fairly simple, as it is on this Felder. But that box guard surrounds and protects you from the blade and from things flying into your eyes. Dust collection is often incorporated into the box guard, and you will only get true dust evacuation with a table saw by putting suction on both the guard and the underneath of the table. The box guard does two things. It, one, physically protects you from touching that blade. If you do get a kickback, it will deflect your hand from going into that blade. It also gives you a visual reference. When that blade goes to speed, it becomes invisible, at least on the periphery. And this tells you where that blade is, and keep your hands out of that sole. My fourth table saw rule is not so much as a safety tip as a sensible work tip that will save you a lot of time. If you can save a few seconds every time you do something, and you do it frequently, at the end of a day, a week, a month, a year, a lot of time is saved. Most saws today come with a set of rulers on them that allow you to measure with the rip fence. By adjusting these and getting them accurate so that whatever you set here is exactly the width or the length that you're going to cut, you're going to save a lot of time, and you're going to get more accuracy. Because frankly, trying to line a ruler up with a blade is difficult. You have to find the outside corner of the correct carbide tooth and get an exact distance from the fence. And if you're using a tape, they have some inaccuracies in them to begin with. By setting this up to an accurate setting that you get what you set every time, you're going to save time, and you're going to add some safety because it isn't all that safe to hold a ruler up here and measure that distance. Number 5 is that you never use the rip fence and the miter gauge together. In a sliding table saw, the miter gauge is built into this sliding table, but in most table saws, it's an auxiliary device that slides in a T-slot right here. And a common thing to do is to, if you wanted to say a 7-inch long piece, I'd set 7 inches here and cut it with a miter gauge. The only problem with that idea is that as you get this cut going and it finally cuts off, the friction of the blade in the back will cause it to want to turn, and the diagonal of the piece is longer than the length of the piece, and it will catch and throw it out with some really ugly force. So the rule is you never use the two directly together. A lot of saws today have adjustable fence so that as I cut this off, it'll drop free on the table right here and not be encumbered and can't catch and turn. If your saw doesn't have that, there's a very easy solution. And that is to make yourself up a block of wood that's exactly 2 inches square. Or if you're looking in millimeters, something close to that. And you simply add 2 inches to your measurement. So I set this to 9 inches now. I put that there. I put my piece against it, slide right on through. And once it drops off the diagonal, there's enough room in there, everything will be fine. Number 6 pertains to rip cuts, which is any cut that goes through the grain. And we generally set the rip fence for the width we want to cut the material to. This happens to be 3.5 inches wide. OSHA has a rule, which is a sensible one, that you can only hand push a piece through the saw that is 4 inches or greater. So this you cannot do that with. If I'm hand pushing a piece, I lock 2 of my fingers over the fence like this, so that if it kicks back, I'm not going to be as easily dragged towards the blade, and the piece will go under me rather than come with it. So let's say that we wanted to make a 2-inch cut here. We would set it to 2 inches. And I'm going to actually move this out because I'm not going to do any cutting because the noise would make it impossible to hear this talk. But you would then push this through with a push stick like this. And this brings me to the last thing that will greatly enhance the safety. It's really number 7. And that's an outfeed table or support. And that will allow me to just push this forward. If I don't have this outfeed table, I start having to press downward with a lot of force in my arm here. And if I go array, especially with a naked blade, I'm going to be in that blade. So that outfeed table just takes all the danger. And for really long work, I actually figured this shot out so that my workbench is actually the same height, that it can just continue right along onto the workbench. It's very easy to rig a piece of plywood on the back of your saw. That's what I did with the Powermatic I had before this saw. And you can safely just shoot that stuff onto the outfeed table, no danger whatsoever, and keep on working. So those are the things that will make you safe around a table saw. The final just tip is sharp blades are important too. A dull blade is much more prone to kickbacks because being dull, it doesn't cut to true width and it burns and drags and everything else. This is Ernie Conover saying, thanks for visiting my shop and work safely.